Hey, we're cooking with gas here on the Jewcast.
Okay, careful using a phrase like that.
This trial is a travesty. It's a travesty of a mockery, of a sham, of a mockery, of a travesty, of two mockeries of a sham.
Tradition!
Oh, shut up, Carl! Shut your goddamn Jew mouth! You people are why there's war in the Middle East!
Gekackt von Jan.
Nebbig.
Verpoepoepoe.
Vermischt.
Verkackt.
Vertutzt.
Verstonken.
Fartig.
Exactly.
You're what Grammy Hall would call a real Jew.
And away we go. Episode 63 coming at you.
Wow, straight from quarantine. We're still locked up in New York City, but we're trying to be optimistic.
We're doing our best to keep bringing you the most Jewish news we can.
We're trying to bring you the Jewish podcast around.
We're trying to raise awareness about what it is that the Jews do so that we can try to fight against the misinformation and the anti-Semitism that is still a part of our daily lives, it seems.
Crazy anti-Semitism always going on. You know, it's still people are blaming the Jews for coronavirus.
Well, we're not doing a hell of a job to fight against. We're not doing a hell of a job on our own.
So this week was Lag Boamer.
Right, which is Hebrew for the 33rd day in the Omer, which is the...
Okay, so the Omer is a time between Passover and Shavuos. It was kind of like a harvest time, and apparently it was also a time of mourning. I guess the reason why it was a time of mourning was because there was a Rabbi Akiva. It's actually kind of interesting. I think it almost parallels what's happening today, that there was a plague that ravaged his disciples because they did not act respectfully towards each other.
Huh.
And it killed 24,000 Jews.
Wow.
So that's why people act like a little bit of mourning during this time. They don't get haircuts. You're not supposed to have joyous activities and listen to music and stuff like that. No getting married or shaving. But on Lag Boamer, you could do those things.
Huh, okay.
So that's one reason why they say they could do that. That's one reason why they say that they celebrate Lag Boamer too, is because this is when the plague died.
Right, I was reading that it's like this was like a break in the plague that was said to have occurred during that rabbi's time.
Right, and well, that's one reason. Then apparently also there's another reason, which was the rabbi who really let people know about the Kabbalah. He died on this day, and he kind of gave people the Zohar, which is the classic text of the Kabbalah, on Lag Boamer, on his deathbed. He taught his disciples all about, the mystical traditions. So that's another reason why they say maybe we celebrate Lag Boamer. There's not like a definitive reason, and then there's another reason where it's like a good day to enjoy outside and give tribute to God's beauty that He made of the world.
I mean, I find it ironic a little bit that it is supposed to celebrate the break in the plague, and people were going out to celebrate it this week. There were hundreds of people in different areas in Brooklyn that I read about that were celebrating it and were freaking people out because it was, large gatherings, people not wearing masks, and it's like the plague has not broken here yet. We're not. We should not be celebrating the end of the plague before it is over.
No, we are in our own plague. Well, so people are blaming, saying that it's the Jews' fault for coronavirus to different extents. Some people are saying that the Jews created it. Some people are saying the Jews are spreading it because of, gatherings like this that are happening in Brooklyn, like that happened with funerals, that have happened with, prayers and people getting married and so many things that aren't only happening in Judaism, that are happening with all religions, but there has been a big awareness about the Jewish community doing it, especially in New York. What type of responsibility do you think those Hasidics that are doing it have in, quelling the anti-Semitism and not feeding, the fire? Or do you think that, no, if they want to celebrate, they could do what they want? People are going to Central Park. Why are we being hard on the Jews? People just want to be anti-Semitic. What do you think? Do you think the Jewish people have a responsibility to say, no, we can't do this. We have to stay inside. We don't want more people giving them a reason to hate us, or that shouldn't be a thing? No,
I think we should be staying inside. We should be following the guidelines. The problem I have with a lot of the religious extremists, especially, you get into these communities that have their own police and security forces, so they don't really rely on public service. You don't rely on the NYPD to police their community. They rely on each other to do that, and I think that you have too many people at the top that are like, well, we control our own, so it's fine. We don't have to worry about it. It's not coming in. But I don't think that they have really – it's not a lot of scientific minds that are coming to that decision from the religious standpoint, I would think.
Okay. Do you think they have the response? So that you think that they do have a responsibility to say, hey, this isn't right? The rabbis, the scholars, the elders in the community should say, there are people already saying that we're spreading this, that we're doing this. We need to stop. We need to set an example more.
100%. I think just like everybody should be following these rules. I think that it's short-sighted to do anything else at this point. I really think that we all have a responsibility, and I think that even more so if you're part of a group that is being unfairly vilified and blamed for things that it looks like you're not necessarily combating. I mean, you got to have some awareness,
But to what degree? So now, because I'm on the fence about this. I'm like, should the Jewish people be like, no, we can't do this. We have to set an example. We don't want people hating on us, or like they should be able to do what they want and not have to worry about other people's hatred or other people's opinions or other people passing judgment or spreading false rumors and lies.
I mean, I think that's the biggest problem that is facing a lot of us during this pandemic is, what is the information that you really should be using to figure out what you're doing. I think we should all be following some kind of moral code as to how we worry about other people. It's not just whether or not you take care of yourself. A lot of the reasons that they have this quarantine is so that you don't unknowingly pass it to somebody that's more vulnerable. It's about taking care of yourself in order to take care of others.
Well, that's what they're saying, but there are other places in the world that haven't had this, that are either already past the disease or haven't had as many deaths. So there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of uncertainty to really I feel like pass judgment on anybody for doing anything. It's
a touchy situation. I hear what you're saying. I know that there are differing opinions on both sides of this. So.
But I do think it's very interesting, to get back to a little bit what we were talking about earlier about Lag Boamer, and during this time between Passover and Shavuos, the time where they count the Omer, the time that we're in right now, this plague killed 24,000 people, and now in New York, I think we're about at almost 22,000 people have died.
Wow.
And so we're in the midst of our own plague. You're right. They shouldn't be celebrating. Our plague, it hasn't ended yet. The ways they kind of celebrate Lag Boamer is they have a bonfire.
Right. There were bonfires in empty parking lots in Brooklyn the other night.
Yeah, and they weren't just having hobos around it for warmth. They were for celebrations.
Yeah, they were dancing hand in hand.
And they weren't using marshmallows either because most of them aren't kosher. Another theory is that Lag Boamer was celebrated because it was the day that Bar Kokhba achieved a victory over the Romans, and bonfires were lit because that's how they signaled that there was a victory throughout the land. Another tradition apparently is bows and arrows. Kids playing with bows and arrows, very dangerous. This is a very dangerous holiday. This is not a kid-friendly holiday. One reason is because the bows and arrows were used as weapons when they fought the Romans. There's another explanation that in Hebrew, the word is the same for rainbow, are very similar words.
Okay.
And during this time, there were no rainbows. In the lifetime of the rabbi who was spread the Kabbalah, since the Hebrew word for rainbow and bow are one and the same, keshet. They play with bows and arrows as a way of celebrating the great sage. So this is an interesting holiday too, because there are a lot of reasons why they say this is why we celebrate, and there are a lot of reasons why they say and this is why we do the things that we do.
We're all out of rainbows, kid. Here's a projectile weapon instead.
Yeah, right. Try not to kill anybody.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an interesting holiday. Interesting because of what's happening in the world today.
Yeah.
Interesting of just how it has so many different interpretations. It's kind of like a newer holiday. It's a minor holiday, Lag Boamer. I think I remember when I was a kid growing up in Hebrew Day School, they would take us to a park. It was a day that we went outside and kind of celebrated. I don't remember any bonfires. And they didn't give us bows and arrows either.
That does sound like it would be a liability issue.
I think the best they gave us was like playing baseball or something.
Yeah.
So we're about to have a guest on the show.
Yes.
This guy, Jack Jordon, he contacted us asking us, to kind of do a crossover episode with him. He does a radio show / podcast called Interfaith-ish. He comes from a background that's mixed of, Jewish, Christian, and Bahai, which we'll get into what that is, I guess, when we speak to him. And we're going to bring him on in right now. Okay, hey, we're really happy to have a guest today. He reached out to us on email. He's the host of the Interfaith-ish podcast radio show out of Washington, D.C., Jack Jordon. How you doing, Jack?
Doing all right. Happy to be here. Thanks for responding to my random message after stalking you on your podcast.
Well, we're just happy that we're not kvetching into the void, It's nice to have some feedback.
Yeah, you can sometimes the void kvetches back at you.
Exactly.
Yeah, we hope not too much. The void, there's enough kvetching going on. We don't need the void kvetching too. So, Jack, you were actually brought up in a Jewish environment.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I grew up going to synagogue. I was going to a conservative synagogue in New Jersey. Went to Hebrew school dutifully through high school. Went to Jewish summer camp.
Okay, nice. What summer camp?
Havonim Dror. If you're
Sounds
familiar
very
with
Jewish.
With hobo heads. Yeah. They it was a based on a kibbutz style summer camp. So instead of like horseback riding and kayaking, we had to work in the garden and do trash pickup across the.
Oh my!
Wow, child labor. It sounds like a child labor. Did it have you making sneakers or the sandals? Not
Just I think carrots and cucumbers in the garden.
Wow.
And some wood projects and things like that, making benches or whatever for the.
A lot of chores.
Campground. It was a lot of chores. I mean, it was a lot of fun. There was the Zionist indoctrination that I think was definitely either overtly or subtly part of the messaging, depending on how aware. I was a pretty blissfully ignorant kid, so I was just there to have fun and have a good time. But upon reflection, it was definitely present.
Okay, and so then at what point did you start not being so involved with Judaism?
I don't know that I ever stopped being involved with Judaism. I think like a lot of kids. I mean, we were in synagogue every week. We weren't Shomer Shabbos or anything like that. We didn't keep kosher in our house, but we had a Shabbat ritual at home, and I grew up in a household that was. Let me know if this sounds familiar. There was a lot of yelling. And
yeah, that does sound familiar.
I think that's every household, though.
Yeah. So there was some tension. I think between my parents. Obviously, they broke up later when I was in college. But Shabbat was actually the time where we came together and felt unified. Like nobody could go out on a Friday night until we had lit candles and said the motzi and then everybody, split, especially as we got into teenage years. But I always appreciated that, that time that there was sort of like a calming moment, centering moment during the week.
So were you a believer when you were doing all these traditions and participating in Judaism and with your family?
I mean, believer, that still feels like it's such a goyish term. I feel like it's such a weird thing to say. So here's a scenario that I think sort of illustrates it. So my parents, my dad's Jewish, my mom is not. She's from a nominally Christian family. Lots of ranging of religious affiliations, and on her side, she wasn't particularly affiliated. So we had, we each had our bar mitzvah, bar and bat mitzvah. My little sister had her bat mitzvah, and we had these second cousins that came to the bat mitzvah, who were much more on the I mean, maybe they were evangelical. I'm not quite sure exactly how they would identify, but they were Christian. And you could just see that, like, my mom's cousin was struggling a little bit to sort of get a foothold on anything that felt familiar in this context of being at a bar mitzvah where it was all in Hebrew and Aramaic and traditions and everything that she wasn't familiar with. And so I remember at the reception, she came over to me at one point and she said, I just think it's so wonderful that we can all get together and praise God at an event like this. And I was like, what are you talking about? That is not where my mindset was at all. Like, all the stories from the Old Testament, all the greatest hits. I mean, I was a superhero kid. I was a comic book kid growing up. They all sounded like superheroes, guys running around with funny names, funny costumes, doing magic tricks, and everything. So that's pretty much where I was at on sort of the religious, belief in God sort of thing growing up.
Okay.
It was more family tradition. You do this because your family does this.
Oh, do it because the family does it. You didn't have like a strong connection yourself or belief. So
I would say to God. I had a connection to the culture, to the tradition.
Right. So I know you mentioned that your aunt wasn't so into the bar mitzvah. I mean, she was like they were like outsiders in the bar mitzvah, but they had an appreciation. They were horrified by the horror, but they had an appreciation of that you were all there kind of praying to a God. And now, from what I understand, you are part of it's called Bahai?
Yeah. So I'm part of the Bahai community. So
I never heard of this.
You've never heard of the Bahai faith?
I did not hear of it until I looked it up, because it was part of your bio. But I thought it was very interesting how it kind of says that it's kind of like a step above all the religions from what I gathered, and all the different gods, whether it be Hashem or Buddha or Muhammad, they're all manifestations of this, and it's about like an inclusion of all religions. It's actually kind of nice and beautiful.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so
that's
you're right.
kind of what your aunt or your cousin, that's what they were getting at almost when they were saying.
Well, that cousin was Christian. So she, like I said, I think she was trying to figure out, just how to bring this into a frame that she could understand.
I mean, what part of the bar mitzvah was the part that you enjoyed the most?
Oh, I mean, the food. I don't know. Running around with my friends, acting like idiots. 13-year-olds, running crazy. We didn't have like a super crazy, rent out a hotel ballroom bar mitzvah. We just did it. The party was in our backyard.
Right.
But getting back to the Baha'i thing. So yeah. I mean, I think you're right. The fundamental principle of the Baha'i faith is oneness. This idea of oneness. So not that there are necessarily lots of different gods, but there is one divine source, one power, one force, if you want to use a Star Wars term, that sort of created the universe, one creator, and all the different religions that we have are basically are connected to that, and different expressions and at different times and in different places, right? So that oneness connects all the different religions, and the different main figures that we have in these different religions, prophets, you could say, messengers of God, are manifestations of that divine energy. Right, so that includes all the, Moses and Abraham and Noah, and it includes Jesus, and includes Muhammad, and includes Buddha and everybody, and includes all the way up to and going forward into the future. The most recent one Baha'is consider is Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah is a prophet, messenger of the Baha'i faith, who was in the mid 1800s in Persia, in Iran.
Okay, I thought you were going to say Thanos.
Who would consider Thanos a messenger of God? I mean, if anything, it would be
messenger of God. He's
Steve Rogers.
The people.
It would be Steve Rogers. He's worthy of wielding the hammer.
It would be Steve Ditko, probably.
It depends which God we're talking about. Old Testament
read about
God.
Steve Ditko? Steve Ditko's got some crazy stuff in his bio.
Yeah, well, all those guys do.
But let's steer the conversation away from comic books and back towards religion and Baha'i. So at what point do you feel like you stopped identifying, like I know you still identify as a Jew in Judaism, but It seems like it's under a broader umbrella of like the Bahai. So like when did you kind of make this change, and what motivated you to do that?
Sure. So here's the thing: is that in the Baha'i faith, one does not convert, one does not give up. Is asked to like close the door on their any sort of connection or identity, whether cultural or religious. The Baha'i faith celebrates diversity and it celebrates inclusion and that oneness spirit, right? So from my perspective, I never stopped being Jewish. In fact, I think that, had I never encountered the Baha'i faith, I feel like I probably would have just continued like lots of folks that I grew up with were kind of like, culturally Jewish, but the religious practices, faded. My practice was a half-life of my dad's practice, which was a half-life of his parents' practice, which was probably a half-life of theirs, right? So, I could have probably lived a very secular, non-religious life and, had the same level of involvement going to family holidays and things like that. So at this point, I mean, basically when I was in college, I was involved with activism. I was interested in, this was around the time that the Iraq War came out and everything. So I was thinking about, big worldly life-changing things. And part of that was asking questions around religion. And, I have this Baha'i grandmother, my mom's mom. She happened to be a Baha'i, and my mom wasn't one. I asked her questions about it because I was taking in all this different information. I liked what I heard. I read books. I got to meet members of the Baha'i community where I was at college. And it spoke to me. It appealed to me. So, it was something like, look, I believe this, and I'm not being asked to change who I am in terms of my identity, but it is asking of me to think more deeply about my connection to the rest of the world.
Okay. So do you still do any Jewish traditions? Like I know you really loved Friday night dinner and stuff. Do you do that in your home?
Yeah, so when I got married, my wife is a practicing Baha'i as well. She's black, so didn't have any context for Jewish traditions really growing up. But when we got together, I said, look, this is something that's really important to me. Like I said, it was a meaningful part of my family connection. I want to share it with our kid, when we have a kid. And so we have our daughter, her name's Chaya, and we have Shabbat every Friday night. We light the candles and we say prayers, and we, you do the Esher Chaya with mama and the prayers with our kiddo. And we, I think it's likewise a time for us to keep focused and keep centered. And I think on another level, I think it helps to connect this, our beautiful daughter who's growing up, with more of a affiliation with the Baha'i community, beyond her extended family. She doesn't really have a lot of affiliation or connection with the Jewish community, some friends here and there. But she knows how to say the prayers in Hebrew, and she's actively involved when we have Passover Seder with our cousins and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's a dynamic part of my life. It's not something that I feel like I can let go of.
Okay, it's a big part. Yeah, it sounds like it.
Do you have you have a congregation that you go to? Do you guys go to temple?
I haven't really in a long time. I mean, I do a lot of interfaith work, so there are communities that I am involved with in terms of collaborative projects, and I do. I'm a filmmaker and a photographer, and so when I can support them in those ways, I definitely go out of my way to do that. So it's more on the community organizing, social activism side of things. There are communities here in the DC area, and then beyond that, it's family.
Right.
How old is your daughter?
8.
She's 8, and does she like the participating in the Jewish traditions, or does she think they're a drag?
No, she loves the Seder. It's lots of fun for her. We have our family's got a farm. Some cousins have a farm up in the Catskills. And we either go up there or go to Philly for our Seder. And, it's farm rules when we're up in the Catskills. She just runs around with her cousins and looking at the...
How competitive is the search for the Afikoman?
Oh, it's cutthroat, dude. But I'll tell you what's more cutthroat than the Afikoman is our family has this tradition where every year we do a different art activity. Like, you have to bring your A game coming to the Seder. Everybody's got a part, and you either have to, like, one year it might be a poem, or you have to like make a funny hat or write a play or something like that. So it's always, we've got a lot of artists in our family, and it's always a lot of creative fun. This year was interesting because it was all a Zoom Seder.
Right.
It was a little nutty. We recorded it, and I did a transcription of our 3-hour-long Seder, and it reads like a zany stage play. So it's a lot of fun.
We talk a lot about anti-Semitism. There's a lot going on now. A lot of blame being passed with coronavirus. Amongst just that, anti-Semitism is at an all-time high throughout the world.
Sure.
You have a daughter. What are you going to tell your daughter about anti-Semitism? How are you going to explain it to her?
Well, look, man, she's going to grow up as a black woman in America, and you can ask my wife about that. You know
okay,
what I mean?
So
that's she's getting it from a number of different sides. She's a brown kid. She's a brown woman. She's going to be a brown woman with a funny name. So, she's got a couple of things going that she's going to have to grow up real quick about. But we do our best, I think, talking about these things in the context of both of those identities, because I think that obviously these are two groups, both black folks and Jewish folks that are facing a lot of
that are great at basketball.
Hostility.
No, I'm just yes, of course, that have been oppressed and have been, hated on for way too long.
Yeah. I mean, I think she is more aware, I think, than certainly I was when I was a kid of this. But I think the other thing is letting our kid be a kid and protecting her as much as we can from having to worry about all this, especially during this pandemic time. You can just see that it's having an effect, that she's worried about going outside and what it means because of the tense feeling that you have when you encounter groups of people or whatever. So I think as much as we can, we're really trying to just preserve, look, you're a kid, you don't have to worry about the world quite yet. You need to have an awareness. You need to be prepared. That's why she's studying martial arts. But I think it's as much, a spiritual preparation as it is sort of a physical preparation.
Yeah.
And is she aware of the stories? Does she know about Noah and Abraham and Moses? Or
we've got a couple of books that talk about, these. I don't know if you guys had these books growing up. I can't remember what the publisher is, but there's this classic book called Bible Stories for Jewish Children or something. Anyway, so she's got a couple of copies of that, and we've read them together. She knows the story of Passover. I think if you got her on the podcast, maybe she would clam up a little bit about reciting it verse by verse.
No, she won't sing the Mona Shana for us.
No, she can do that. That she can do it.
So, Jack, how long have you been hosting the Interfaith-ish podcast radio show?
Interfaith-ish it just crossed the 2-year mark. Started 2 years ago. It's hosted on Tacoma Radio out of Tacoma Park, Maryland. It's also podcasted, and basically it's a show that brings together folks from different spiritual and religious traditions to talk about what it is that we believe and how that informs our individual and community life. And the interfaith part is that diversity of traditions, and then the ish part is we got to roll up our sleeves and get into some ish, because it's not just about being nice.
Well, it's funny.
Sometimes you got to have a discussion.
Jonathan and I talk a lot on the show about how we really identify more from a secular standpoint with Judaism. That even though he was raised in a more religious household than I was, we were both still bar mitzvahed, and we were both brought up with a lot of those traditions. And I think as we've become adults, we've connected more to the traditions than we do to some of the religious touch points, to the rituals.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about how much we enjoy certain dishes, how much food and family and bringing all those people together is really important to us. Like I think, the families yelling at each other as a way of showing love is always a thing that comes up. But I think I like the idea of your podcast because one of the things that I think one of the reasons I think that a lot of people have such animosity towards the Jews is that they don't understand why we do some of the things that we do. We don't really understand some of our traditions, and Jews are not necessarily we're a long-winded group, so we're not as good at explaining it succinctly to somebody that really wants to know.
Ask my wife about that.
Yeah,
totally. She would agree with you.
So I think that that's one of the reasons that we get into a lot of trouble and a lot of miscommunication and misinformation is because some of the stuff, like even we don't understand what half of it is sometimes. That's why we have religious scholars and rabbinical students and people that are whose whole job is just to explain why we're not supposed to go out on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I think it's important that in interfaith spaces that there is a diversity of Jewish voices, just like there are a diversity of voices from any tradition, because it helps to show that no tradition is a monolith, and that you have as many opinions and perspectives and experiences as there are people.
Right.
I'm sure you've had Jewish guests on your show. Has there been any major conflict between like a Jewish guest and a guest of another religion on your podcast, on your radio show podcast?
Yeah, well, I would say, look, I mean, if somebody is agreeing to be part of an interfaith dialogue, chances are they're on the team of civility and know how to, have a polite conversation with folks, even if there are very deep theological or even political differences that are there. I think a lot of times, folks, this is what I was just saying before, is that one of the important things about particularly in the Jewish community that other folks don't get is how can somebody be an atheist Jew? How can somebody be an agnostic Jew? How can somebody be the type of Jew, that I grew up as, basically going to synagogue every week, immersed in the traditions, but not necessarily having a strong concept or connection to God as a divine, force present in everyday life? Because that part of it, I think, is a difference that a lot of other traditions have, that is sort of the starting point for their faith, you could say.
Okay, so cool.
I think it's a good thing to have.
So it's good there hasn't been a lot of
religious
conflict.
And non-religious Jews involved.
I'm glad there haven't been a lot of Jew haters on your show. We got to wrap it up. I want to ask you a couple quick questions. What's your favorite Jewish food?
Oh man, if you had seen the way I dove through that jar of gefilte fish a couple of months ago, my daughter couldn't believe how quickly I went through the gefilte fish all by myself. They were not interested at all.
Do you know the old joke about why nobody's ever been able to catch a gefilte fish?
Tell me.
It takes one bite of the bait and sends it back.
All right. You mentioned Passover. Is that your favorite Jewish holiday? If not, what is?
Yeah, I would say so, just because that's what I practice, more regularly. I'm not really doing much of the other ones on the calendar. Although growing up, I was always blown away by the Kol Nidre service. I felt like I just felt it in my bones when I would see the cantor prostrate himself before on the bima. It was just something about that moment was always very touching. You had to sit through 12 hours of services to get there, but
yeah, wow, you have a really great attitude about it. Who's your favorite Jewish historical biblical figure?
Abby Hoffman.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
Not no one from the Bible. I like that.
Steal this podcast.
A good Jew. Yeah, hopefully he won't steal this podcast. Have you been to Israel, Jack?
Yeah, I've gone. My dad used to work there, so I went when I was a kid. As a baby. Don't remember that too much. I had a cousin that made Aliyah, and so we went for a wedding, for their wedding. And I went once with that youth group that I was talking about when I was 15. Oh, and then I've also been there on pilgrimage as a Baha'i.
Oh wow, you've been there a bunch of times.
Yeah, the Baha'i World Center is in Haifa.
Cool. We really appreciate you coming on the show today. Is there anything you want to plug before we say goodbye?
Well, I'll just say, if you're interested in getting into some interfaith-ish with the rest of us, you can check us out on any podcast platform. And if you're in the D.C. area, every other Wednesday, 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. on 94.3 FM Tacoma Radio.
Awesome. Thanks. Jack
Yeah.
Gordon, everybody. Thanks for coming on the show, Jack. We look forward
guys.
to
Appreciate
coming
it.
on yours.
Yeah, we can't wait to have you.
All
Yes.
right. Have a good one.
Thanks a lot, Jack.
Shabbat shalom.
Back at you. Oh, well, that was great. Thank you to Jack Gordon for coming on and spreading some
check out
interfaith.
Interfaith-ish.
Yes, we will put up the links on the show notes. Make sure you follow us on the social medias as well. If you're not, you can find us across all platforms at American Jew Podcast, except on Twitter, we are American Jew Pod. Yeah, email us at AmericanJewPodcast@gmail. Why not?
Do it.
You can find me on...
Check me out. I'm all over social media at Jonathan Randall. It's so easy.
It is easy. And you can find me on the gram at Beatnik Nudnik. I'm also on TikTok for some reason. Thank you guys for listening. Please make sure you rate and review the show. Goodbye.